The morning of my mother's 65th birthday party, I sat in my car in the parking lot of a CVS on Folly Road and stared at the invitation my sister had mailed me 6 weeks earlier. Thick cream cardstock, calligraphy font, the kind of stationery that costs more than most people's grocery runs. Celebrating Margaret, a milestone birthday. Join us Saturday at 5 p.m. My name wasn't on the host line. It said, hosted by Lauren and Derek. Just Lauren and Derek, not Claire. Not your daughter, Claire, who spent every Saturday for the past 2 years driving 40 minutes each way to sit with your mother while Lauren was at spin class. I put the invitation back in my glove compartment and drove to the party. You know that particular kind of quiet that settles into you when you've cried everything out and there's nothing left? That's where I was living those days. Not numb exactly, more like clarified. Like a broth that's been reduced down to just the essential thing. I should back up. My mother raised us alone after our father left when I was 11 and Lauren was 15. She worked as an administrative coordinator for a hospital system for 23 years. She never complained. She made our lunches, came to every school play, learned to change the oil in her own car because she said she wasn't going to pay a man to do something YouTube could teach her for free. She was the kind of woman who laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them and kept a drawer full of birthday cards she'd bought on sale, already signed. Ready to go. She was my favorite person on earth. When she was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's 2.5 years ago, I was the one sitting beside her in the neurologist's office. Lauren had a work thing. Lauren always had a work thing. I held my mother's hand while the doctor explained what the next few years might look like, and I smiled at her the whole time, even though I was doing that thing where you press your tongue to the roof of your mouth to keep from crying. I'm a physical therapist. I've worked with Parkinson's patients for most of my career. I understood exactly what the diagnosis meant, and I started rearranging my life around it before we even got to the car. Lauren called that evening. She said she was devastated. She said she just couldn't believe it. She said she was going to take over managing Mom's finances so Mom wouldn't have to worry. And wasn't that a relief? And didn't that make Claire feel better knowing Lauren was handling it? And I said yes. Because Lauren was 4 years older and had always handled things, and because I trusted her the way you trust the floor beneath your feet automatically, without thinking about it. That was my first mistake. For the next several months, things seemed fine. My mother's condition was stable. She had good days and harder days. I went to her on the weekends, took her to her physical therapy appointments, which is a strange thing. Being a physical therapist whose mother needs physical therapy, watching someone else work with your person, and sometimes we'd sit on her porch afterward and drink sweet tea, and she'd tell me the same 3 stories from her 20s, and I never once told her she'd already told me. I liked hearing them. I liked watching her face while she remembered being young. Lauren visited on holidays. She sent grocery delivery orders. She called it being practical. The first thing I noticed was the grocery delivery. My mother mentioned, offhand, that Lauren had set up an account, and it was so convenient, wasn't it, not having to go to the store. Except when I looked at my mother's kitchen, there were 7 cans of soup she'd never eat, and 4 bottles of the wrong kind of salad dressing, and a rotisserie chicken that had been sitting in the fridge for 4 days. The order had been $212. I didn't say anything. I told myself Lauren was trying. 3 months later, my mother asked me, with this careful, apologetic expression that broke my heart a little, whether I could help her find her checkbook. She said she thought she'd left it somewhere. I found it in the kitchen drawer where she always kept it. And then I noticed the balance on the statement sitting next to it on the counter. I'm not the kind of person who snoops. I want to be very clear about that. I picked up the statement because it was right there, and because the number I saw didn't make sense. My mother's account should have had somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 in it. She'd been careful her whole life, careful in the way people are when they grow up, understanding that there isn't a safety net. The number I saw was $11,422. I sat down at my mother's kitchen table and I stayed very still for a long time. Then I started looking. I was careful about it. I'm not by nature a careful person. I'm impulsive and loud, and my best friend Teresa says I have the emotional regulation of a golden retriever, but I was careful about this. I asked my mother gently over several weeks about her finances. I asked if she knew she'd given Lauren signing authority. She said yes, of course. Lauren had explained it was easier that way. I asked if she'd reviewed any of the transactions. She said Lauren sent her a summary every few months. I asked if I could see the summaries. My mother looked at me with those clear gray eyes and said she'd misplaced them. Sweetheart, she wasn't sure where they were. I contacted my mother's bank. As her secondary emergency contact a designation Lauren had apparently forgotten to remove when she became primary, I was able to request statements going back 18 months. I drove to the branch in person, and I sat with the documents for 2 hours in their little glass-walled consultation room, and by the time I walked out, I understood 3 things very clearly. First, my sister had transferred a total of $68,000 from my mother's savings account in transactions that ranged from $800 to $6,000, always under $10,000, spread out over 14 months, the kind of amounts that don't trigger automatic flags. Second, my mother's house had a second mortgage on it, taken out 11 months ago. My mother, who has early-stage Parkinson's and who asked me to help her find her checkbook, had supposedly signed documents authorizing a $112,000 line of credit against her paid-off home. Third, the payments on that line of credit were going directly to an account registered to Derek's LLC. Derek is my brother-in-law. He sells promotional merchandise, branded pens, logo hats, company swag. Or at least that's what he's done for the past decade. I found out later, through documents I should not have needed to find, that his business had been losing money for the past 3 years, and that he'd been hiding that from Lauren and probably from everyone, and that he'd found a solution to his problem. I called an elder law attorney that same afternoon. Her name was Patricia, and she had one of those voices that makes you feel like the world is fundamentally manageable. And she told me, calmly and without drama, that what I was describing sounded like financial elder abuse and that we had options, real ones. I retained her on the spot. Over the next 6 weeks, Patricia and I built a file. Bank records, the second mortgage documents, Derek's LLC registration, a comparison of my mother's signature on the mortgage authorization versus known authentic signatures, which Patricia had an expert review and flag as potentially inconsistent. I reported everything to Adult Protective Services. I filed a complaint with the State Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division, and I didn't tell Lauren any of it. I want to explain why, because I know how that sounds. She's my sister. I've known her my entire life. I remember her teaching me to French braid my hair and letting me sleep in her bed when I had nightmares. I thought about calling her every single day. I picked up the phone a dozen times. But Patricia was clear. If Lauren knew I was building a case, evidence could disappear. Accounts could be drained further. And my mother, whose house was already mortgaged against her knowledge, could end up with nothing. So I kept my mouth shut and I drove to my mother's house every Saturday, and I braided her hair and watched HGTV with her, and didn't say a word. Then the birthday party invitation arrived. Lauren had planned the party for months. 65 people initially, which grew to over 150 by the week before. She'd rented out the ballroom space at a restaurant in Mount Pleasant, hired a DJ, ordered a cake from a boutique bakery that I happened to know cost about $400. I wondered, briefly, whose account that had come from. I RSVP'd yes. I bought my mother a first edition of a book she'd loved since the 80s, a novel she'd read so many times her original copy had fallen apart at the binding. I wrapped it myself. I did not tell Lauren I was coming with anything other than a birthday present. The party was beautiful. I'll give Lauren that. The restaurant had strung lights along the ceiling, and there were flowers on every table. And my mother was sitting at the head table in a lilac dress, looking more rested than I'd seen her in months. And for about 90 seconds when I walked in, I let myself feel something that was almost like hope. Then Derek touched Lauren's shoulder and leaned down and said something in her ear, and she looked across the room at me, and her expression did something complicated. I smiled at her. I held up the wrapped gift. She smiled back, tight and careful, and turned away. The dinner was fine. I sat at a table with some of my mother's friends from her hospital days and a few cousins I hadn't seen since my grandmother's funeral. And we ate salmon and talked about things that had nothing to do with money or betrayal. I watched my mother at the head table. She laughed at something Lauren said. She touched Lauren's hand. I had to look away. After the main course, Derek stood up. I had known something was coming. I'd known it from the moment I saw Lauren's face when I walked in, from the way Derek had been watching me all evening, with the particular expression of a man who thinks he's about to win something. I set down my fork. I folded my hands in my lap. Derek tapped his glass and thanked everyone for being there and said what a milestone this was and how much Margaret meant to all of them. He talked about Lauren's dedication. He talked about how Lauren had stepped up to manage their mother's affairs and what a selfless act that was, and how not everyone in the family had been equally present. And here he paused, just for a breath, just long enough for the people at the tables nearest the front to glance around trying to figure out who he meant and that it had fallen to Lauren to make the hard decisions, to be the one who showed up. Then Lauren stood up. She talked for about 4 minutes. She talked about their mother's strength and her values and the importance of family. She talked about being there through the diagnosis, through the hard appointments. She talked about herself mostly, in the way people do when they're performing grief or love or loyalty for an audience, and it was polished, and it was convincing, and several people at nearby tables were dabbing their eyes, and I sat there and listened to every word. She ended by saying that some people choose their own comfort over family, that some people are present only when it's convenient, that she hoped tonight everyone would reflect on what it means to really show up for the people you love. She was looking at me when she said it. The room was quiet. 150 people, most of whom had no context, who only knew that Lauren had just given a moving speech about her devoted care for her mother and that she was looking at someone in the room with an expression that communicated disapproval. I felt their attention shift toward me. I felt the weight of it, that particular social pressure that is meant to make you shrink. I didn't shrink. I thought about my mother, sitting at the head table with her lilac dress, and her good days, and her hard days. I thought about the second mortgage. I thought about $68,000 gone in 14 months in transactions just under the flag threshold. I thought about 6 weeks of building a file and keeping my mouth shut and driving to my mother's house every Saturday while Lauren sent grocery delivery with the wrong salad dressing. I stood up. Lauren's expression flickered. Just for a second. Just enough. "I'd like to say something," I said. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. "I love my mother more than I have words for. I think most of you know her and know what kind of person she is. So I'm not going to stand here and list her qualities. You already know them." I reached down and picked up the folder I'd slid under my chair when I sat down. I set it on the table. I didn't open it yet. "What I will say," I continued, "is that loving someone means protecting them. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when the people you need to protect them from are people you also love." Lauren said my name. A warning. $68,000, I said. Transferred out of our mother's savings account over 14 months, in increments small enough to avoid detection. $112,000, borrowed against our mother's paid-off home through a line of credit that our mother, who has Parkinson's disease, does not remember signing. Money that went directly into an LLC registered to Derek. The room had gone the specific kind of silent that happens when the air changes. I opened the folder. I didn't read from it. I just opened it so that it was visible, so that it existed in the room, so that the paper was real, and the numbers on it were real, and the situation was real. "I retained an elder law attorney 7 weeks ago," I said. "I filed a report with Adult Protective Services 5 weeks ago. I filed a complaint with the Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division 3 weeks ago. I am telling you this here, tonight, in front of everyone my mother loves, because my sister just stood in front of 150 people and implied that I am the one who failed her. And I need my mother to know my voice broke here. Just briefly. Just once, I need my mother to know that I was there. I was always there. I was just there quietly, in a way that didn't make a good speech. I looked at my mother. She was looking back at me. Her face was doing something I didn't have a name for. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her, and she was very still. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said. "I love you. You deserve so much better than this." I picked up the folder and I sat back down. I don't know exactly what happened in the next 60 seconds because I was looking at my hands. I heard Derek's voice, sharp and rising. I heard Lauren say something I couldn't make out. I heard the room around me in fragments, someone's chair scraping the floor, a woman near me exhaling audibly, 2 of my mother's friends murmuring to each other. Then I felt a hand on my arm. Warm, a little unsteady. My mother had walked around from the head table and was standing beside me. She sat down in the empty chair next to mine, and she took my hand in both of hers, the way she'd been doing since I was small. She didn't say anything for a long moment. The room watched us. Derek was talking to someone on his phone near the door. Lauren was standing very still, her face the color of copy paper. "I have hard days," my mother said finally, quietly, "just for me. And on my hard days, I don't always remember things clearly. But I remember you. Every Saturday. I always remember that." I did cry then. I couldn't help it. I want to be accurate about what happened afterward, because some of it happened quickly, and some of it took time, and I think it's important to say it honestly rather than neatly. The party ended early. Most of the guests left within 30 minutes of me standing up. My mother's closest friends stayed, and a few cousins, and they sat with her and made sure she got home safely. And one of her oldest friends, a woman named Ruth, who had known my mother since they were both new mothers in a neighborhood neither of them could afford anymore, pulled me aside on the way out and squeezed my hands and said, "Good girl," in a voice that made me feel like I was 11 years old in the best possible way. Lauren didn't speak to me that night. Derek left before the cake was served. The legal process was not fast, and it was not simple. And anyone who tells you that justice is clean and satisfying in the way movies suggest has not navigated the Attorney General's office or the timeline of a civil suit. What I can tell you is that it moved. Patricia had built a strong file, and the financial records were what they were, and Derek's LLC was what it was, and the expert review of my mother's signature on the mortgage documents was what it was. Derek was charged, not immediately, but within 4 months of the party. Lauren retained her own attorney and made the argument that she had trusted Derek to manage everything, that she had not known the extent of what he was doing, and I sat across from my attorney in her office and thought about whether I believed that, and found that I did not know the answer, and that it did not matter as much as I expected it to. What mattered was my mother's house. Patricia worked with the bank, with the documentation we had, and after a long and grinding process, the second mortgage was challenged and ultimately reversed on the basis of document fraud. My mother's house is hers again, free and clear, the way she earned it. The $68,000 was harder. Some of it came back through civil proceedings, not all of it. Patricia had warned me about that from the beginning, that financial elder abuse is devastatingly underreported and even more devastatingly underpenalized, and that we might get justice without getting whole. She was right. We got most of it. We got enough. Lauren and I don't have a relationship right now. I say right now because I'm still working out what I think the future looks like, and I have a therapist who tells me that ambivalence is not weakness, and that complicated feelings about people who hurt people you love are not a character flaw. I believe her on most days. What I can tell you is that I see my mother every Saturday. That has not changed. We still sit on her porch when the weather is good, and she still tells me the same 3 stories from her 20s, and I still never tell her she's told me before, because I am still not tired of watching her face when she remembers being young. About 8 months after the party, I was walking back to my car after my mother's physical therapy appointment when I ran into a man in the waiting room who was there with his father. We'd nodded at each other a few times over previous months. You develop a kind of shorthand familiarity with the other people who are navigating the same system, the same waiting rooms, the same particular brand of patience and helplessness. His name was James. He was quiet in the way that suggests depth rather than absence. He asked if I wanted to get coffee, and I said I hadn't been to the good coffee place on King Street in months, and he said he knew the one, and that was that. We've been together for almost 6 months now. He has his father's stubbornness and his own kindness, and he makes very bad puns that he delivers with complete sincerity, and I laugh every time, even when I don't want to. He met my mother 3 months ago, and she told him one of her stories from her 20s, and he listened like he had nowhere else to be. And when we got back to my car, I had to sit for a moment before I could drive. People ask me sometimes whether I regret standing up at that birthday party, whether it was worth it to do it that way, publicly, in front of everyone, when I could have simply let the legal process run its course quietly. Here is what I know. My mother went home that night knowing someone had protected her. She went home knowing that the confusion she'd felt about her accounts and her signature and the money that didn't seem right wasn't confusion at all, that she'd been right to feel something was wrong, that her instincts were still intact, that Parkinson's hadn't taken that from her. She told me later that that was the part that mattered most to her, not the money recovered, not Derek's charges, that she hadn't been losing her mind. I think about the 150 people at that party sometimes. I think about the ones who came up to me afterward, quietly, one at a time, to say that their own family had been through something similar, or that they'd suspected something and hadn't known what to do, or just to say thank you without explaining for what. I think about Ruth squeezing my hands and saying good girl and the way it felt like permission to have done the thing I did. I don't know if I'd call what I felt satisfaction. It wasn't hot enough for that. It was more like the feeling of setting something heavy down that you've been carrying for a long time, the specific ache in your arms when you finally stop. My mother's good days are still good. Her hard days are harder than they were 2 years ago, and they'll get harder, and I know that, and I'm not going to look away from it. What I'm going to do is be there. Every Saturday. Quietly, in a way that doesn't make a good speech. That's always been enough for me. Last month, she found a birthday card in her drawer, one of the ones she keeps pre-signed and ready, and she gave it to me even though my birthday was 4 months away. She'd written underneath her signature, in her handwriting that trembles a little now on the downstrokes, "You showed up. That's everything." I've kept it on my kitchen counter ever since. Some mornings when I'm making coffee and it catches my eye, I still don't know quite what to do with the size of it. I just leave it there. I let it be what it is. Some endings are just beginnings that haven't introduced themselves yet. I'm still in mine. Most days, that feels like enough. Some days it feels like more than I expected to get, which is the best kind of surprise, the quiet kind. The kind that arrives in waiting rooms and porch swings and birthday cards found in kitchen drawers. The kind that doesn't announce itself. It just stays.